Hello, welcome to Venture Capital with me, Katie Pilbeam. This week we discuss why the South Stream could be canned. We talk car production, telecoms, Russian banks, fertilizers and Apple. But before all that, we're going to talk about OPEC because despite the biggest oil slump since the global crisis, OPEC will not be cutting production to boost the price. Now, the 12 OPEC energy ministers, they met in Vienna this week, and their decision not to try to shore up the prices by reducing production was no surprise to the market, really, but it did mean that the price of oil slumped even further to below $72 a barrel. Now, production will remain at 30 million barrels per day, which was originally agreed in December 2011 by these countries just here, the cartel. And as you can see, these are the break-even prices. We're going to run right up there with $140 a barrel. Now, this is despite oil sitting at a 4-year low, having lost over 30% of its value since June. And that's on sluggish global demand and, of course, rising production from the US due to shale gas. So we're going to discuss all of this right now with Peter Panoff. He's the chairman of the board from the Tliok Group, an investment firm here in Moscow. So is OPEC, is it abdicating its role as a swing producer? What's it up to at the moment? It didn't do anything.
I think it was well expected, as a matter of fact. The cartels work fine when they have unity and understanding and cooperation within. But the members of OPEC now have very different goals and economic situations. So the Middle Eastern producers have very low lifting costs, low cost of production, and have very wealthy economies, have a lot of savings. On the contrary, countries like Venezuela or Nigeria, the economies are very far from Middle Eastern economies.
Exactly.
So they have different goals. But I think it's a sign that Saudi Arabia doesn't like to be a swing producer anymore, and they would like to keep their market shares and would like to keep some additional sources of oil out of the market. Where
does that leave Russia?
Well, I think should they change the price, the prices will be, the production, the prices will be stabilized probably around 8-ish. Now we can expect, I believe, close to between 70 and 60 in the medium term. The next meeting of OPEC going to be in June, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, June.
So for Russia, it's not a very pleasant time, obviously, for multiple reasons. So first of all, the ruble would be expected to go even lower.
Oh dear.
It's a very close correlation. You can take all the factors into account, but the main factor is the oil price. It's very simple, which very clear implications for Russian budget. It had to be reduced, and some of the promises Russian government made has to be changed, updated, and government has to be flexible and choose its priority for the next several years for oil production. But for the Russian oil companies, the challenges are a little different. First of all, they need to revisit the exploration of new regions, and the economical sustainability of these projects may be now challenged.
Because of sanctions.
Exactly, because of sanctions and because of the lower oil prices. So if you start exploration in the Arctic shelf at 120, it's one economic picture, but if it's 60, it's completely different, and you ask a question whether or not it's economically viable even to start this project. So it's going to be challenging. And a second shorter term problem for Russian oil companies is substantial debt they accumulated over the years. So now they need to pay this debt. So Russian corporate debt grew by $170 million over the last 3 years. And only in 2015, they have to pay off about $150 million out of this debt. So they need probably support of the market, of the government, to service the debt.
I also want to ask, really, oil being the price it is at the moment, there is one big winner in all of this, and that is the consumer.
Definitely. I think shorter term, if the share of all oil and other energy resources and global GDP is getting less than 3.5%, it's a very healthy, it's a potential for a healthy growth of production, of consumption, et cetera, et cetera. However, in the longer term, the global economy is interested in the diversified sources of oil. It's very clear that the Middle East can supply the entire global economy with oil, and it may be the most economically beneficial situation for the world. However, we all know that unfortunately this region is quite unstable from a political situation. And if something happens there, as history shows, the oil prices can jump. So the global economy need to have production in Russia, in Canada, in shale oil, etc., etc. So longer term, we need multiple sources of production, and new areas of production require a substantial capital, new technology, investments, etc. So it will require the oil at some point in time go back to make sure that new sources of production are in the market.
Okay. Peter Panoff, thank you so much for coming into the Venture Capital studio. We really appreciate that,
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Russia's Minister of Economic Development warned this week that Russia could scrap its South Stream pipeline project if the EU sees no risks in transiting gas through Ukraine. Now, the whole point of the pipeline is to deliver Russian gas directly to the EU to avoid disruptions, like the ones that were caused by Ukraine back in 2006 and 2009, when Kiev was found guilty of siphoning off its gas on the way to Europe. Russian gas making its way to Europe. That happened. Now, Alexei Yurikayev, he said this week that South Stream is a way of removing transit risks for European consumers. And if there isn't a demand, then we won't build it. He went on to say that countries that were not worried about their gas deliveries would have to take the risk upon themselves. So let's talk about that right now with Konstantin Simonov, the head of the Federal Energy Security Fund here in Russia. So is Yurikayev right then to say this? He's basically saying, just to paraphrase, if there's no risk, then we won't build the pipeline to South Stream because that was its purpose in the first place.
So, you know, the situation is very simple. If Europe doesn't want to see Russian gas on its market, so what can we do? We try to knock on the closed door, and it's very difficult for us. South Stream is more important for Europeans, not for Russia. Because, you know, without Russian gas, the situation in Europe will be extremely difficult. You were speaking about energy security, so we are trying to you know, increase the security, energy security of Europe.
And how does China feature in all of this? Russia's flourishing relationship with China and gas being delivered there via pipelines?
We see the very fast acceleration of our negotiation with China. You know, we signed already so-called Eastern route for 38 BCM of annual supply to China. But now I think that next spring it's possible to sign the Altai contract and so-called Western route, and instead of 30 BCM it can be 100 BCM. So that is why it's a serious amount, and you know, for Gazprom it's also the question of choice. What is the priority? To build Altai, to build the power of Siberia, or to continue to press on Europe to explain, not to press even, but to explain to Europe the necessity of this pipeline.
And what about the risk for Europe then? Because he's saying, look, you're taking on the risk yourselves. What kind of risk are we talking about?
The idea is very simple. If Europe doesn't want to see the real energy security, because, you know, South Stream is a direct supply of Russian gas to Europe without any transit countries. If Europe still want to have all this headache with Ukraine, because, you know, we still don't know what will be the situation this winter with Ukraine. Yes, we signed this agreement in Brussels, but it's not working. Ukraine doesn't want to pay, and the situation is still unpredictable. If Europe still want to see this very stupid situation, what can we do with this? Of course, we can eliminate this project, but we hope that Europe will be more clever, because we don't want to go away from European market. We try to be one of the biggest supplier to European gas market. So that is why it's the question of, we can say, the question to Europe. Europe is clever or Europe is not so clever.
Okay, Konstantin Simonov, thank you for that. OK, let's dive into corporate news here in Russia. And we're going to start with this product right here because Apple has hiked prices for its iPhones, its iPads and its computers on its Russian online store in response to the falling ruble. Average prices for Apple products have now gone up on average some 25%. Now, in response, Samsung has decided to lower the prices of its flagship smartphones. Russia's largest bank posted a 24% drop in third quarter profits this week. Sberbank put the drop down to the economic slowdown in Russia and a slowdown in the growth of incomes for the Russian population too. Russia's Gazprom Neft has reportedly struck an oil offshore exploration deal with Vietnam. The deal will also include Gazprom Neft will be supplying ESPO blend crude oil to Vietnam as well. Russian car giant Avtovaz plans to increase production by a fifth next year. That's despite Lada sales falling 16% in the first 10 months of this year. Rostelecom will cut up to 12,000 employees annually over the next 3 years. Russia's biggest telecom operator is switching to digital equipment and so no longer needs such a vast workforce. OK, Tim Kirby, what a week you had last week. $800 US you put in the kitty. So what have you done this week? The same?
We had, I never know how to pronounce it. I want to say Akron, like Akron, Ohio, near my place of birth, but I think it's pronounced Akron. But anyways, they make fertilizer, and they made enough fertilizer to go up 0.5% and for me to get $150. So I'm feeling very good about that. OK,
that's quite a modest growth this week, considering it's a fertilizer company. But never mind, it's in the black.
Yeah, and while I'm on camera, I want to make one big speculation. I think that they went up because in Russia, because of the sanctions, the farming, agricultural industry has been forced to grow because the food's been cut off. And I think that might be connected to fertilizer. That's just a speculation. But let's see.
That would make sense, yeah, putting on more fertilizers to get more food to feed everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And who are we going to invest in this week? One company I've been very curious in, Raous. R-A-O-U-E-S.
What is that?
Yes, that's a very bizarre name, but what they do is manage and maintain power plants of various sorts. It's actually a very large company, and when you read their list of everything they do, if you're not a scientist, it's hard to understand. But guess what? People need electricity really badly.
Of course.
So we'll see what the value of juice is worth.
Indeed, you've educated me this week. All right, Tim Kirby, well done. Very modest there, 0.5%, not brilliant. Let's try and step it up next week with a bit of electricity.
0.5%'s a lot of money.
Oh, stop it yourself, honestly. Okay, Tim Kirby, well done. Good luck. We'll see you next week. Looking forward to it because we're going to cash in at the end of the year. Okay, I think the idea of cashing in the money will definitely inspire Tim, or inspire the wheel, we should say. We are leading up to Christmas, but we'll be in December this time next week, so I'm going to be getting my jingle on, so join me then. Goodbye.